Hello students, welcome to Comparative Politics lectures. We're looking at the state. So this lecture will go over what we discussed in the class. Essentially, we're covering stuff from chapter 2 of the textbook by Patrick O'Neill. So what is the state? In international relations theory, we learned that a state is an entity that has territory, population, and the authority to govern that territory and population. And this authority has to be recognized by other states. So states are primary actors in international relations. Each state has territory, population, and the right to govern. And in comparative politics, we look at how the state governs over its population and territory. We're interested so much about the authority to govern that we pay special attention in comparative politics. What is a state? Again, we covered that. We say it has sovereignty, but we also say something is governing it. So there must be a government, something which has the authority, which basically is the physical entity that has the right to govern, okay? But we're not yet talking about what exactly the state is, and we will in a minute. We also mentioned there's a population. We call that population sometimes civil society. We hear that term a lot in political science, actually, civil society. So why do we say population suddenly is civil? And why do we say it's a society? Society means people are social in some aspect. So we say that the civil society as a whole is the population living in the state that is bound by constitution or social contract to serve the state and which confers it some rights. So we're saying that the people just don't live here. They made a pact with the government or the state rather to serve the state peacefully. Maybe they will have some protest, maybe they will have exercise some freedom of speech, but in the end of the day, they're not having a civil war, okay? And in return, the population gets certain rights from the state. So it's not just a one-way servitude kind of relationship. The state gives something back. Politically, it gives particular kinds of rights and freedoms, okay? And that will vary depending on the state, okay? So how does the state maintain sovereignty? We just mentioned that the civil society has made a contract or a social contract with the state. They've made a social contract actually amongst each other, and that creates the state, right? So they've made this social contract that they will keep the peace, they will do things in an orderly fashion, they won't challenge the state, they won't challenge the existence of the state by way of having a war. But actually, do people really do that? Or are we just simply born into a state and later when we're old, we find out that we were born into this country, it has particular laws, it has particular governments, and the political system is a certain way, and we just have to accept it, right? If we try to get out of the system, or rather challenge the system, it might be counterproductive. It might be dangerous, right? So we really are not making a social contract these days. The contracts were made in the past, perhaps, when the constitutions of countries were written, but we didn't have a say in this. So how then does the state maintain sovereignty? So then one group of scholars has suggested that the state is using force or coercion. So it might be threatening us, it might be using violence against us. And in that way, it maintains its sovereignty. So Patrick O'Neill on page 28 says, a state is thus a set of institutions that seeks to wield the most force within a territory, establishing order and deterring challenges from inside and out. So we're talking about using violence within a territory to establish order. So what kind of order is the state protecting if it has to use violence? It must be some kind of very bad system that they're calling, they're calling the status quo order. But if they have to use violence, it kind of begs the question, there might be something wrong with the state, right? In so doing, he says, it provides security for its subjects by limiting the danger of external attacks and internal crime and disorder. Okay, so I can imagine civil society is erupting into war. You need to stop it, right? But if you're really trying to overthrow some kind of civil unrest, doesn't it mean that there's something inherently wrong with the state? So I don't know how it can actually provide security for the subjects if it's actually engaging this kind of oppressive system. However, we're made to believe that this is what the state is set up to do, is to use most force. And the idea is that it's somehow protecting the population. But it's interesting that he uses the word subject, because subject is some term that we might use when we talk about, kings and queens. When we talk about democracy, we probably want to use the word citizen. But I think this kind of is appropriate because we're saying, oh, the state is this oppressive kind of system that uses force. It's almost like having one of those absolute monarchy kind of a situation, right? Where the king can make all the laws. In this system, it seems that the state is using force to deal with everything, right? Any kind of threat. So we can question what use of force by the state implies if we live in a democracy. Really, can the state have this kind of force? So co-option. Other people said, look, this idea of using force is very interesting. But if you constantly use force, then you're really begging for the population to rise up and just destroy the state, have a civil war and challenge the very existence of an oppressive state. So that really is not what states are doing if they want to retain power. They must be giving some freedoms to people. They must be thinking rationally. And violence is probably not the first option, but the last, right? So they're saying something else is going on here. Force is probably used as the very last option. Ideology. So Antonio Gramsci is one of the scholars that looks at whether the state is using co-option to create buy-in by the population, right? So this ideology is what binds society together. It's a set of values that the state creates. It just throws it out there into the population and basically make sure that all the processes of socialization, such as education, you're going to public school, you're going to public university, or any kind of university, or you're watching the news, you're reading books. So this ideology or set of ideas is basically binding society together and creating support for the state. So even when the state unleashes violence against protesters, people in the government, in the civil society, are going to support the state. So once it has this buy-in from the public, the state can also do all kinds of things, including levy taxes from the public to raise money for the very military that it can use against its people. right? And by saying that, oh, we need money to protect ourselves. So Gramsci looked at Italian society during World War II, and basically his critique is against Mussolini's government and the fascist system that was created. And so he's really looking at the governments that use military against itself. He calls this type of rule hegemony, right? So a hegemon has the support of its people. It's a state that has the support of its people to use violence on the population. So that's the idea of co-option. And Benedict Anderson has written this book called Imagine Communities, and he looks at types of ways that the nation actually creates this buy-in. So first we have to create the idea of a nation. How do we do that? We have a large variety of people living in a country. Even if they look similar and speak similar languages, their ideas are different. They're rational, they're thinking all the time about themselves. So we also assume that people are at some level individuals, and they think about their own interests, they think about their family's interests, then they think about other people. So how do we create a cohesive, value system within such a disparate group? So he says, oh, it starts with, the idea of the nation. It's an imagined community. And we create this idea by having symbols, by creating narratives about the nation, by having institutions that people can follow. And we do this through education, through use of media, books, all of that, right? So first thing, when we're kids, we learn about the national flag, national anthem. These are simple things that we can easily understand as, as if you tell a child, here's the national flag, here's the national anthem, we can easily attach our minds to it. As we grow older, we learn about the constitutions, about the national holidays, about the histories of wars of independence or colonialism, all of that. We learn about political leaders. We learn about all kinds of struggles the nation has had. We hear national songs, more of it. So then our idea and our love for the state is developed in this way. And people go on to serve in military, in public office, they also feel this attachment to the state, a sense of what we say is patriotism, right? We talked a lot about this in class. So let's stop here for now, and we will look at some of the theoretical stuff in the next part of this lecture.